Well, as you can see, we are not in the Mustang.
No, we're not.
We are not in the Sebring. In
No,
fact, we are not driving down the road at all.
No, we're not.
We are on an airplane, an aircraft, a Boeing aircraft, and we are just about to depart for Washington, D.C.,
Right.
the nation's capital, and we're going to see our senator, Mr. Mike Lee.
Oh boy.
Well, I've written it. You know, they say write, and we wrote. Get a little form letter back. Send email, a little form letter back. So we're just going to walk in.
Right.
We're just going to walk right in, and we're going to say, here we are, and there's a few things that we need to discuss.
Right.
Because there's some stupidity going on here.
Do you think he's going to buy that? Which is
I hope so.
I hope so.
I will never. Well, I didn't vote for him the first time, but I will never vote for him again. Well, I can't say again because I never voted for him the first time.
Yeah, I didn't either.
But I do have a couple, just a couple of small things.
Okay.
I would like to bring up with you.
We'll do that.
So here we go.
There we go.
Oh, and while we're there, we're going to go to the Railroad Museum.
That's worth the trip right there.
Yeah, that might even be the real reason we're going.
Yep.
We are going to the Railroad Museum in Baltimore.
Baltimore, absolutely. And we're off.
Off we go.
We're more off than usual, but we're off.
Now, anyone who thinks that going to Washington isn't a classic example of screwing around has simply never seen Congress in session. Going to Washington is in fact screwing around because Washington is filled with museums which contain collections of just really, really incredible stuff. And yes, it's really cool to go to the memorials to some of the great Americans and some of the great events of American history. As an American, it's nearly impossible to not be moved by just being in the presence of these amazing, amazing things. And it's actually a rather short drive over to Baltimore, Maryland, home of America's oldest railroad and their museum, the Baltimore and Ohio. The museum was built in this really cool old roundhouse. It's a completely covered roundhouse. The turntable and all of the stalls are inside a single building, and the museum was constructed in this building and the associated back shops. This cool little gadget is known as the Tom Thumb. It's America's first steam locomotive. It was built between 1829 and 1830. The very first steam locomotives were built in 1825 in Great Britain. There had been attempts to build them as early as 1796, but, well, it just never worked until about 1825. This cool engine is called the Atlantic. It's a type of engine known as a grasshopper because of the weird connecting rods here that go up and down. It was built in 1832. Now, both of these engines were actually scrapped out right after they were built and used for parts. These are recreations that were built later on. This one was built in the 1890s. Now, the passenger car also needed to be invented, and they really had no idea what a passenger car should look like. These look like stagecoaches because, well, that's what they were familiar with back then, was the stagecoach. So using the stagecoach as a jumping off point, they re-engineered the concept into a passenger car. This one's fairly elaborate. It even has an upper deck for, open air observation. I'd like to see a horse try to pull this thing. Now, this little guy is called the John Hancock, and it's also considered to be a grasshopper type of engine. It was built in 1836 and then rebuilt in 1892. Now, all of the engines we've seen here have vertical boilers. This guy, the Lafayette, had a horizontal boiler, and oh my gosh, this was a technological breakthrough, made the engine so much more efficient. It's kind of a hybrid horizontal boiler. It still has a vertical boiler kind of element to it. This reproduction was built in 1927. The original was built in 1837. The idea behind a horizontal boiler is to force the fire down a series of tubes inside the boiler to create more heating area. It works so well it spelled the end of the vertical boiler. Now, this is an early example of a freight car called a three-pot hopper. They were used for hauling all kinds of loose material that would fit in an open-top car. O-scale guy Don Hendrickson is building several of these in O-scale and 20.3 scale. He's building them on his computer and printing them on a 3D printer. I'll show you that when he gets those going. There was a lot of experimenting going on with these early engines, every attempt to make them better, faster, and stronger. Now this odd-looking duck is called a Camel. It was actually built in 1869, so it's a bit later of an engine. The reasoning behind this weird design was to try to force a better draft up through the boiler by putting the firebox at the back and rather low here, and that required putting the crew cab up above the boiler. Contemporaries of that engine saw service in the Civil War, and by then they were actually quite efficient units. This one has been dressed up as Lincoln's funeral train to recreate that great historic event. It's number 147 that ran on the Baltimore, Ohio. Known as the Thatcher Perkins, it was built in 1863. The museum has several really nice locomotives from the Civil War era. It's really an impressive collection. Well, the Baltimore and Ohio has certainly one of America's greatest railroad museums, and certainly the finest collection of very, very early locomotives. It's really, really fun to come to the nation's capital and just sort of immerse yourself in history, as opposed to, let's say, visiting your senator.
Well, I'm thoroughly convinced that if the government would have done as much of a pain in the behind 200 years ago as it is now, Washington, Jefferson, all those guys, they'd have just gone back to England.
Right.
Why not?
Exactly.
Just get a little house out in the country. But I have to say that Mike Lee was so gracious when we showed up.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. Now, I understand.
He heard we would.
He's a busy man. He had votes to avoid taking.
Right.
And he had people to avoid meeting. He had a whole agenda of things that he was avoiding that day. So seeing us
Was right on that list.
But his people, they did give us saltwater taffy.
They did.
They have a bowl.
Right.
They have a bowl there of
Right.
saltwater taffy from Salt Lake City.
Oh.
And you can take two.
That's it.
It's
just
sort of
two.
like, the bowl that they put out on trick-or-treating.
Really.
It says take one. It says take two.
Take two. That was it.
You can, because Mike has to bring it personally from Salt Lake in his carry-on baggage. Take two.
Really.
And if you show up on Wednesday, they have green Jello.
Green Jello.
Green Jello. Now, the
Yummy.
one thing that they don't have is civility.
Oh.
They're the rudest. It's like, take your saltwater taffy and go.
Oh.
Just take your salt and go. Leave us alone. You're unimportant. Go.
What do we do?
They're rude.
Okay.
They're rude. It's Washington.
In fact,
We interviewed one of them.
That's just it. What can you say?
So, in this particular case, maybe people would find it boring. But the Railroad Museum,
That was not boring.
unlike Congress, it was pretty darn cool.
That was cool. That was cool. That was worth it all.
If you haven't been over to the website, get on over to the website and check that out, toymantelevision.com. And of course the YouTube channel, subscribe.
Yep.
Remember, they moved the button
They moved it
It's no
now
longer in the upper corner, it's now in the lower corner.
in this corner over here.
I'm all turned around.
We're on a plane.
Airplanes do that.
We're on that one.
Anyway, it's in the lower corner now because they moved it.
And your rocket ship is
Click on
now.
it, takes you to the channel, subscribe. Yeah, rocket ship down here just off screen. Takes you to the channel, and you can subscribe from there. Well, we're not sure how you found this fun and frivolity on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. I will see you here again next Sunday. Probably not on an airplane.
No more airplanes for a while.
Probably not, because we are giving up on Mike Lee. Done with that. But we will see you here again next week with some more significant screwing around. Bye. Hollywood sign.